In the final, fading years of Imperial Russia, when war shook the empire and revolution brewed in secret rooms, there was one man whose name seemed to echo louder than any general or noble. He was not royalty. He was not a politician. He had no army, no title, but still, the court feared him, the public hated him, and the empress trusted him more than anyone else on earth. His name was Grigori Rasputin, a wandering peasant, a mystic, a man whose presence could calm a dying child, or so it was said. Some believed he had the power to heal with prayer. Others said he manipulated the imperial family with hypnosis, or worse, with black magic. There were rumors that he bathed in sin to cleanse others of theirs, that he was both a prophet and a devil, that he whispered into the ear of the Tsarina, and she listened more to him than to her own husband, the Tsar. No one could agree on exactly what Rasputin was, but everyone agreed on one thing. He was dangerous. In the cold of Petrograd's streets, they spoke his name with disgust. At lavish dinner parties, noblemen whispered of his influence with clenched teeth. At night, candles flickered in the palace, where Tsarina Alexandra prayed not to God, but for Rasputin's guidance. And all the while, outside the gates, people starved. Soldiers died. Revolution grew. Many saw him as a symptom of everything that was broken in the empire. He was a man of filth and faith, of visions and vices. He drank too much, boasted too often, and yet somehow continued to rise in power. How had a peasant from the Siberian wilderness become one of the most feared and protected men in all of Russia? That is the mystery. That is why Rasputin's story survives. And that is where we begin. He was not born in wealth. Far from it. Grigori Yefimovich Rasputin entered the world in January of 1869 in the village of Pokrovskoye, a frozen, dirt-covered corner of western Siberia. His family were peasants, like nearly everyone else in the village. There were no paved roads, no carriages. Life was hard, and death came often. Rasputin received little, if any, formal education. For most of his youth, he remained illiterate. What he lacked in academic training, however, he made up for in presence. From an early age, villagers claimed that Grigori was different. He had a way of staring not just at you, but into you. Animals, some said, grew still in his company. Children followed him, wide-eyed. He could be loud, wild, even violent, but in certain moments, he was calm and deeply, eerily focused. Some say he had his first religious visions in his 20s. Others say he saw angels as a child. What we know is this. Around 1897, Rasputin left his wife and children behind and embarked on a religious pilgrimage that would change the course of his life. He wandered from monastery to monastery, sleeping on floors, fasting, praying, searching for something. Some believe he joined a sect known as the Klists, a secretive and controversial group that sought purification through sin, mixing intense prayer with ritual flagellation and ecstatic dancing. Whether he was truly part of them or not, Rasputin carried some of their influence with him. He returned to his village, changed thinner, more intense, more driven. Soon, he set out again, this time with a purpose. To spread his visions, to heal, to guide, and above all to be seen. By 1905, he had reached the capital, St. Petersburg. It was here, in the center of Russian power, that Rasputin's legend began to take shape. Introduced to high-ranking clergy and nobility by curious believers, he quickly made an impression. He stood out. Unlike the polished priests of the city, Rasputin wore a simple robe. He rarely bathed. His beard was wild, his voice was rough. But when he spoke, people listened. He claimed no title. Yet he walked as if he was on a mission from God. Word spread. And soon, Rasputin received an invitation that would change everything: to meet the imperial family. The Romanovs were desperate. Their only son, Alexei, had been born with hemophilia, a condition that made even small injuries life-threatening. Doctors had failed. Advisors offered no hope. Rasputin promised healing, and something strange happened. On more than one occasion, after Rasputin prayed over the boy, the bleeding stopped. Was it coincidence? Was it the calming effect of his presence that lowered the child's stress? Or was there something else? The Tsarina didn't question it. She believed God had sent Rasputin to save her son, and through him, the future of Russia itself. Distrust would turn to fear. Fear would turn to hatred. And hatred in Imperial Russia always found a target. But Rasputin was no ordinary man. The more people tried to silence him, the more his legend grew. His name moved in whispers, through palace halls and dirty streets. No matter what they said, no matter what they did, he remained. He wasn't just part of the story. He was shaping it. And the deeper we look into his life, the more we'll understand why he became one of the most dangerous and most misunderstood men of the 20th century. By 1910, Grigori Rasputin was no longer just a mystic. He had become a force. Inside the gilded walls of the Winter Palace, his name was spoken in private, but always with weight. Courtiers would glance at each other, careful not to say too much. Ministers kept files on his visits. Some priests began to refer to him only as him. Everyone knew who he was. Rasputin had found a place no outsider should ever reach inside the royal family's trust. And more importantly, inside the Tsarina's heart. It began with her son, Alexei. Each time the boy fell ill, Rasputin would be summoned, and more often than not, the bleeding would stop. No doctors could explain it. But Alexandra didn't need science, she saw miracles. She began writing him letters, long, emotional letters. She called him our friend, and sometimes even father. She believed he was sent by God to guide Russia and to protect her family. And when the Tsar, Nicholas II, traveled to the front lines during World War I, Rasputin became her closest advisor. What began as spiritual guidance soon became political influence. Alexandra trusted Rasputin's visions more than the advice of generals or ministers. When Rasputin disliked a man, he was dismissed. When he praised someone, they were promoted. Entire careers rose or fell, depending on what Rasputin saw in his prayers. Some of these decisions were disastrous. He supported ministers who were weak or corrupt. He removed experienced leaders simply because they questioned him. And all the while, the war worsened. Russian soldiers died in the thousands. Bread lines grew, protests rose, and at the center of the chaos, people whispered, "Rasputin did this." Behind the scenes, noblemen and politicians became frantic. They saw the empire falling apart, and to them, Rasputin was not just a problem, he was the symbol of all that was wrong. The Orthodox Church grew uncomfortable with him. Despite being called a holy man, Rasputin drank heavily. He visited brothels, he held late-night gatherings filled with loud music, laughter, and things priests weren't meant to speak of. They said he preached purity, but practiced sin. They said he healed children, but ruined women. They said he was a prophet, a con man, and a demon in a robe. Rumors spiraled out of control. One noblewoman claimed that Rasputin hypnotized her without a word. Another swore she saw him walk through fire unharmed. An officer reported that Rasputin had predicted his own death in exact detail a full year in advance. None of this could be proven, but none of it could be disproven either. And that's where his power lived, in the space between fear and fascination. By 1916, Rasputin was everywhere and nowhere. He had no official title, no desk, no department, but his word carried more weight than generals. Alexandra clung to him. She said he was her guide, her spiritual compass. She believed that as long as Rasputin was alive, her son would live. And as long as her son lived, the Romanov line would survive. So even when her advisors begged her to send him away, she refused. Even when newspapers mocked him, she protected him. Even when foreign ambassadors expressed concern, she defended him. This loyalty only deepened the public's suspicion. Who was this man who had the ear of the Empress? What did he say behind closed doors? What power did he really hold? The truth is, no one knew for certain. And that mystery gave birth to something even darker. By the autumn of 1916, Russia was unraveling. The war had drained its people. The winter brought hunger, cold, and silence broken only by whispers. And always, at the center of those whispers, was one name: Rasputin. He had no army, no office, no rank, but his shadow reached into every corner of the empire. He did not govern from a throne. He did not sit in council, but he spoke, and ministers vanished. He advised, and generals lost command. Inside the palace, few dared confront him. Outside it, many dreamed of it. Among the nobles, the anger was no longer quiet. The Duma Russia's parliament had become restless. Voices rose against the Empress, against the war, against him. One of those voices was Vladimir Purishkevich, a man who saw Rasputin as the symbol of decay, a parasite draining the empire from within. In public speeches, he called him the Dark Force, poisoning the crown, and others began to agree. Rasputin moved as if untouched by the chaos around him. He still held gatherings, gave blessings, wrote letters. He walked freely through the city. But something had changed. He was watched now, followed, tracked. His face appeared in satirical sketches. His name was mocked in cafes and echoed in angry crowds. Even former allies now kept their distance. But the Empress remained loyal. She wrote him often desperate, emotional letters. She begged him to guide her. She feared what would happen without him. Some say she trusted Rasputin more than her own husband. The Tsar was still at the war front, out of touch, far away. In Petrograd, it was Alexandra and, by extension, Rasputin who ruled. And that terrified those in power. Behind closed doors, plots began to form. A small circle of nobles and officers, men of privilege, of position, met in secret. Among them was Prince Felix Yusupov, young, rich, charismatic, the husband of the Tsar's niece. He had danced with Rasputin, dined with him, laughed beside him. But now he planned something else. Another was Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, a royal by blood but deeply disturbed by what Rasputin had become. And with them, the angry voice of Purishkevich, furious, proud, and determined to restore what he saw as Russia's dignity. They believed that removing Rasputin would save the empire, that his death would cleanse the court, that killing one man could change the course of a nation. They were wrong, but they believed. Over the following weeks, they moved with the patience of hunters, never rushing, never repeating a step. They followed Rasputin's routines, his favorite routes through the city, the houses he entered, the hours he returned. They took note of his tastes for wine, for music, for company, and they designed the perfect trap. It would happen at Felix Yusupov's palace, a grand building beside the Moika River, filled with velvet and silence. Guests would be entertained upstairs, where laughter and music would mask the sound of what was planned below. The conspirators prepared the basement with expensive wine, the expensive kind Rasputin never refused. They laced cakes with cyanide. They arranged the furniture carefully, as if every object had a role to play. And then they rehearsed, not just the killing, but the lies that would follow. Each word measured, each step decided, each alibi rehearsed like theater. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Rasputin still walked the icy streets with a crooked smile. Yusupov still attended dinners and smiled for the camera. The court still danced to fading music, as if blind to the end approaching. But in the silence beneath those moments, something darker stirred. Snow fell heavier each day. The skies over Petrograd grew pale and grey. And deep within one of the city's grandest homes, a murder waited patiently for his cue. Then, on a cold night in December, the invitation was sent. It was December, the kind of winter night that feels like it will never end. The streets of Petrograd were frozen quiet, lit only by flickering lamps and the crunch of boots on ice. In the palace by the Moika River, candles glowed behind heavy curtains. Inside, men were preparing for a murder. Rasputin arrived late in the evening. He wore his usual long coat, unhurried, his hands folded behind his back. He had been invited by Felix Yusupov to meet his wife. That was the story, but here was no wife waiting. He stepped into the palace without suspicion. The palace was quiet, too quiet for an aristocratic party, but Rasputin didn't question it. Maybe he didn't care. Maybe he already knew. He was led down a narrow staircase into the basement, a room with carpets, mirrors, and soft furniture. Music drifted faintly from upstairs. A phonograph played to keep up the illusion that others were near. There were no guests, only conspirators hiding upstairs. Yusupov poured glasses of wine, brought pastries, laced with poison. He played the perfect host, friendly, maybe laughing a bit too much. Rasputin sipped the wine slowly and calm. He drank the wine and ate the cakes. They waited and waited. The clock ticked. The poison was strong cyanide, enough to kill several men. But Rasputin remained seated, alert, unaffected. His skin didn't pale. His eyes didn't dull. He asked for more wine and laughed. Yusupov excused himself. His hands were shaking. He went upstairs to talk to the others, Prince Dmitri, Purishkevich, and the doctor who had brought the poison. They whispered in disbelief. What do we do now? They had planned for the poison to kill him. They had not planned for this. Then, Felix took a revolver. He returned to the basement. Rasputin sat still, humming to himself. Yusupov raised the gun. He said nothing. One shot rang out. It hit Rasputin in the chest. He fell backward. Everybody stood silent in the room. Yusupov stared at Rasputin. Then he ran upstairs, breathless and shaken. He's dead, he told them. It was done. The room relaxed. They poured drinks to steady their nerves. They began to talk about how they'd clean up, what they'd tell the world. But below, in the darkness, Rasputin moved. They heard it, the scraping of boots on stone. Yusupov froze. He rushed back down. Rasputin was on his knees, bleeding, gasping, but alive. His eyes wide, his breath ragged. He staggered forward, toward the door, toward the snow. He didn't speak. He ran. The conspirators panicked. They chased him into the courtyard. In the chaos, more shots were fired. This time, Rasputin fell into the snow. Still, he didn't stop moving. His hands clawed at the ice. A shot to the back, then another to the head. Only then did he go still. They wrapped his body in heavy fabric and then tied his body with ropes. Then they dragged him to the river's edge. The Neva River was thick with ice, but the conspirators had broken a hole earlier in the night. With silent effort, they threw him in the water. The darkness swallowed the man they could not kill. The next morning, Russia awoke unaware. The palace was silent. The water flowed beneath its ice. Something had changed, and in time, the river would reveal what they had done. Days passed before his body was found. It surfaced near a bend in the river. The body was swollen and half frozen, as if the river itself had spat him out in protest. The authorities were called. The press circled like wolves. The autopsy told conflicting stories. There were bullet wounds, yes, but some claimed it was water in his lungs. Others said his arms were free from ropes, as if he had still been trying to claw his way out from underneath the ice. One report even claimed there were signs of strangulation. Another, that parts of his body had been mutilated after death. No version made sense. No facts could be trusted, and so the myth began. At his burial, the Empress wept in private. The Tsar said nothing. The royal family, shaken, tried to suppress the panic building outside the palace gates. But news travels faster than silence. Within days, Petrograd was buzzing. Did you hear how he died? Did he rise from the dead? Was he immortal? The legend of Rasputin grew larger in death than it ever had been in life. Newspapers across Europe published crazy stories. In restaurants, cafes, and crowded places, strangers whispered stories. Not one story was the same as the other. Some said he had cursed the Romanovs with his final breath, that he had warned them by saying, "If I die by common men, the Tsar lives, but if I die at the hands of nobles, your dynasty will fall." It was whispered by terrified people, as if saying it out loud might make it real. Weeks passed after Rasputin's death, and the empire he once walked through began to fall apart. The food riots grew worse. People waited in long lines for bread, fighting to feed their families. The anger spread through the streets, and soon it turned toward the palace. In the army, soldiers stopped following orders. They refused to fight. The system that had ruled Russia for centuries was breaking from the inside. Then came March of 1917. Just 3 months after Rasputin's murder, Tsar Nicholas gave up his throne. The Romanov dynasty, a royal line that had lasted for hundreds of years, ended not with pride, but with defeat. Some blamed the war. Others blamed the Tsarina, but many still whispered. Rasputin warned them. After the fall of the Romanov family, and as the Russian Empire broke apart, a new power took control. These were young men, full of fire and ideas, hoping to build a different world. But before they could look forward, they felt the need to erase what had come before, including the memory of Grigori Rasputin. They knew his body had been buried in secret, hidden away after his death. For them, it wasn't enough that he was gone. They feared the power of his story, the shadow of his name. So they searched, they dug, and when they found him, they made sure there would be no grave left to visit. The reports say his body was still in one piece, frozen by the cold Russian winter. He had been dead for weeks, maybe more, and yet some said he still looked strangely alive. Whether this was true or just fear playing tricks, no one can say for certain. They took his body into the woods, away from the city, and made a fire. They didn't speak. There was no ceremony, just flames. And yet, even then, something strange happened. Some of the men would later whisper that Rasputin sat up in the fire, that his eyes opened, that his body refused to lie still. Whether that was real or imagined, it didn't matter. The story had already taken on a life of its own. His body was reduced to ash, but the myth remained untouched. In the years that followed, his name did not fade. It spread across Russia, across Europe, across the world. He became more than a man. He became a mystery people could not stop talking about. Photographs of him became valued, pieces of art, his sharp eyes, wild beard, and haunted expression. Artists drew him. Writers tried to explain him. Filmmakers turned his life into legend. And yet, no one could fully agree on who he really was. To some, he was a healer, a man of faith, who brought comfort to a suffering family. To others, he was a trickster, a conman, who used fear and charm to take control. And to many, he was something worse, a symbol of everything broken in the empire, the final poison in a dying dynasty. Some believed he was chosen by God. Others believed he was sent by the devil. Most people didn't know what to believe. That, perhaps, is why the story lasted until this day. Even now, more than 100 years later, Rasputin's name still holds power. He is the subject of books, television, documentaries, even music. His story has been told 1,000 different ways, as fact, as fiction, as something in between. And yet, every version leaves the same feeling behind, that something about him was different, that something about him doesn't make sense, and that maybe we don't want it to, because the mystery is what keeps him alive. We ask the same questions again and again. Was Rasputin just a poor farmer who fooled the richest family in Russia? Was he truly able to heal the sick, to see the future, to speak with angels? Or was he simply a man, showing the empire its own weakness, its fear, its need to believe in something bigger than itself? No answer ever seems complete. And maybe that's the point. Rasputin died in 1916, but death didn't end his story. They drowned him, they shot him, they burned his body, but they could not kill the legend. His shadow remains not in the streets of St. Petersburg, but in the stories people still tell all over the world. He became something more than human, something people feared, and still do.